Welcome to the Strategy Rewind Podcast. I am your host, Miguel Lebron. Here at the Strategy Rewind Podcast, we look at the relationship between goals, strategies, belief, and objective breakthrough. I'm so excited for today's episode. Hey, if we haven't met before, thank you for being connected here today. I am a father, a leader, an author, a strategy coach, and mentor, and I partner with individuals who have a goal but need a strategy. And in this podcast, we focus on the strategy to help you have a breakthrough moment. Relationships are hard. That statement is a statement we've seen and heard a lot. Like you see it on Facebook posts, on Twitter posts, you see it and hear it from individuals across the board, old, young, in between, it doesn't matter. People consistently say that relationships are hard. However, I don't think relationships are hard. I think that relationships require intention. In order for me to be a good father, I have to be intentional. I have to be intentional if I want to have a good relationship with my wife, if I want to have a good relationship with my in-laws, with my neighbors, with my siblings, with my coworkers. Like, you have to be intentional in order to have a good and healthy relationship. And just like I've gone through and mentioned all of these different relationships, let's keep clear that one thing is the same: intention. Right? So you have platonic relationships and you have romantic relationships, but one thing is clear, and it is that you need intention. Now, when we talk about strategies in order to have good and healthy relationships, I think if your relationship is just starting off, if it's in its embryonic stage, one of the things we need to do is come into this with no expectations. Like, come into this new relationship with zero expectations. Here, let me give you an example. My father and I, we haven't always had the best relationship. My father and my mother, they separated when I was very young. I was about 2 years old or so when my parents divorced, and then my mother later remarried. And my father struggled with an addiction that had him not just in and out of jail, but in and out of my life. And emotionally, he wasn't always available. Because of this, it created difficulty in our relationship. And when later I became older, became a father, and I had my own home and mortgage and all of these things that come with adulting, there was some things that I could understand, and there was some things that I still could not understand. I just couldn't comprehend. So I reached out to my dad after some time of silence between us. I reached out to him and we met. And I remember that when we met for the first time in such a long time, I just simply said to him, I want you to know that, number one, I have zero expectations on where this relationship goes. Zero. I don't care what happened yesterday, last week, last month. I have zero expectations. And I have a bunch of questions, but I have zero expectations on what happens moving forward. And I'm not going to tell you that it's been the most wonderful relationship in the world. We've had some ups and downs. We've had some heart-to-heart conversations. Some serious situations happened in the family, which has shown that the bond is there. But at the same time, it hasn't been all easy. And towards the end of last year, we had a conversation, and I just cleared the air and said, you know what? 2020 is over. We're entering into a new year. I just want everyone to know that I'm entering into this year with zero expectations. I'm not bringing 2020 problems into 2021 and expecting new resolutions. Like, that ain't gonna happen. I hold zero expectations. And oftentimes we just carry expectations that were never fulfilled, expectations that other failed, or things that people said or did or didn't do or didn't say. And we just carry these things and we say that we want to grow, but we just still hold on to expectations that truly are never going to get met. Listen, if one thing I've learned is this: we need to lower our expectations that we have of other individuals and increase increase the expectation that we have of the person in the mirror, that we have of ourselves. And I have found that when I lower my expectations of others and I increase my expectation of me, I'm more intentional. I'm more giving. I'm more loving. I'm more willing. And you know what happens? Oftentimes, the other individual reciprocates. The other individual actually goes ahead and models the same behavior. And so, number one, we need to lower or remove expectations. Now, let's keep this moving forward because the idea is to get to a place where we have healthy and good relationships. We want to have those good relationships. And so there comes a point in the relationship that in order for it to grow, expectations have to be defined. I said in the beginning, there's no expectations. But as we move on, if we really want to see this relationship grow, then we need to define expectations. Before I got married, my wife and we had already been talking. Like when we were friends, we were talking, and I knew where I wanted to take that relationship. I was intentional about it. I told her I want to get married. And we then became boyfriend and girlfriend and then got engaged and we got married. And there was conversation through those periods, through those times in our life. But when we went to the altar, here's what happened as we stood before the minister, as we stood at the altar, in front of all of our friends and families, all of these witnesses, here's what happened. And it is that we said the following: I promise to be with you in sickness and in health, in rich and poor, in good days and bad days, in sunny days and cold days, come hella high water, till death do us part. I'm going to be with you, period. The end. I do. Now we've defined expectations. So when my wife gets sick, she expects me to do what? To do what I said I was going to do, which is be there. Which is be there when she's sick. Be there when she doesn't feel good, when she doesn't feel like herself. And at the same time, I expect her to do the same. Again, if we want good and healthy relationships, there comes a point where we have to define these expectations. We have to actually have this type of honest conversation. This is something that my brother and we went through. Before he got married and before I got married, man, my brother and I were tooth and nail. I had an apartment. My brother would come to my apartment. We would stay up all night, take these road trips, random road trips. We would get lost. It doesn't even matter because we had GPS back then. Like, it just didn't matter where we showed up. But as our life progressed, as we got married, as we became homeowners, became fathers, our life progressed. Obviously, the relationship kind of took a turn. And it was really bad because we weren't even talking at one point or another. There was no beef. There was no animosity. It was just we weren't communicating. And it really wasn't good. But here's what happened. And my brother, kudos to him, because he actually came up to me and said, listen, we need to talk, and we need to talk right now. And we sat down and he said, I don't like where this relationship is. We need to change this. And so we had a conversation where we were honest, where we were transparent, no ego. You know, he admitted his faults, I admitted my faults. And then we defined the expectations of the relationship. Let me tell you something. Our relationship is so much better now than before. Now, granted, we don't take these random road trips, but it's so much healthier because now there's a space where if I'm slipping, if I'm doing something wrong, he'll call me out. And if he's doing something that isn't okay, I'll call him out. And if I'm doing something that's great, he'll shout me out. And if he's doing something that's great, I'm going to shout him out. Like, I'm your biggest cheerleader. Now let's be honest. There are some individuals that you can't have these type of conversations with, where they are so egotistical, they are so self-centered and so self-serving that it's just hard to have this type of conversation with them. And this is where you have to come to a place and ask yourself, is this person actually helping me up, or are they pulling me down? Because if they're pulling me down, that means that they're beneath me. And I can't be pulled down. I can't go backwards. Now, I've written a blog which is titled How to Deal with Toxic People, because there are people that are negative or toxic people, rather it be in your job, in your family. There are toxic people, negative people. So I want to encourage you to head over to miguellebron.com, check out that blog. Now, this is the tactics that I've used on how to have and gain healthy relationships. But I want to bring into this conversation a friend of mine, Vanessa Santiago. Vanessa Santiago has an amazing story which she shares transparently through her podcast, The Voice of Tamar. I would encourage you that if you have not heard this podcast, please consider checking it out. The Voice of Tamar is an amazing podcast. Vanessa speaks transparently about her journey through trauma and how she's actually come to a place of healing. But part of this has to do with relationships. So I really am excited to have her be part of this conversation. But Vanessa, for those who aren't familiar with your work and what you've been doing, let them know about what you're up to.
So I have a podcast where I kind of really share my healing journey through sexual assault. It has been a very long and challenging one. And so on the podcast, I kind of just unveil, like I share all the things that I struggle with. I shared the things I was angry about during my podcast this last season too. I shared about me grieving the death of my brother who was murdered in New York City. So I just kind of share everything.
When we talk about relationships, it's hard oftentimes to establish relationships, more specific, establish healthy boundaries and really kind of find confidence. So we're gonna kind of divide this in two parts. Let's first talk about platonic relationships and creating some healthy boundaries. What are some actionable steps that we can take to create those healthy boundaries within platonic relationships?
Yes. So I think starting, with just knowing your boundaries is like super important, right? Because I think with my own personal experience, which is what filters into how I establish relationships, anyways, my thought of platonic relationships were never really platonic. So it's like if I ever had a conversation with the guy, there was always some kind of romantic feeling that would pop up if the guy was being super nice to me. And so I think that for me, before establishing like a serious platonic relationship, I had to really heal in that area because not every guy that you try to establish a relationship with is a romantic one. And that can become very toxic. And then your expectations of that relationship is just completely warped because you have this thought that it's supposed to turn into something that it's not. I think really healing, and if not, and in the process of healing, just being super self-aware is very important for our platonic relationship with the opposite sex. And then with women in platonic relationships, I think for me, like all of my women relationships are really toxic. They were codependent. We had a common trauma that we would just connect with, and nobody was trying to help anybody out. And so for me, I think when I really started my healing journey, there were just a few people who could come with me and a few people who could not. And I think I had to make a very hard decision to let go of the people who I knew were not in the same healing journey with me. And that was heartbreaking. But along the way, God aligned me with people who were super dedicated to healing or who had healed and were going to give me tips on how to get there.
That's awesome, Vanessa, and totally true. Now, let's switch gears here for a moment. Let's talk about those romantic relationships. What are those strategies that we can do to have healthy romantic relationships?
Yeah. So I think that there's this like really false idea that you have to become like completely perfect before you jump into a relationship. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that for me, with this very healthy relationship, the Lord set it up for me in a way where me and the gentleman were friends for a pretty long time. We worked in ministry together. So I knew him in four seasons. I knew when he was sad. I knew when he was happy. I knew when he was struggling. And so I think that establishing a healthy relationship first requires you to share your expectations. So for me, it's just like, I love Jesus, he's my life. And so that is the baseline for me. Family is super important. Everything that I do needs to either benefit or at least not cause harm to my family. So like once I established those core beliefs, I needed to make sure that he had those same core beliefs. The way that dating relationship work for me is that they're very intentional. So the end goal is marriage and then a life together. And so for me, the baseline is establishing expectations so that nobody goes into the situation feeling like it's going to go another way. Very clear about that. And with me, I lead with everything that's wrong with me. So you can fall in love with the great parts of me in the process. So I'm just very upfront and direct. And it's kind of worked for us.
We're obviously talking about platonic relationships, and you've given some key tactics there with regards to being able to have a romantic relationship. You've given some awesome techniques there. But there's one layer of relationships that oftentimes we neglect to put healthy barriers, and that's those family relationships.
Yeah, so that has been my story. And it's very unfortunate at times, and it comes with a lot of grief. But I knew that, again, very similar to my friends, my family at that time was just not in the same headspace as me trying to heal in this particular way. And so what would happen is that I would try to drag them along with me, but one, they were unwilling, and two, in the process, I was just further getting hurt. And so I had to establish a serious boundary. And sometimes that means that you are not in relationship with those family members, and you don't have conversations until you get to a space where they're very aware of how their behavior affects you, and you guys can come to a common ground and boundary. And so I think that that's what I have had to do, which is very heartbreaking. And I think most recently, I've just had conversations with the Lord, and I'm like, I'm grieving what I felt like these relationships were supposed to look like. We are supposed to be getting our nails done. I was supposed to be getting taught how to cook. Like we were supposed to, like all these things, like I felt like should have happened. And I had those conversations with the Lord. And I'm not saying that like I'm 100% in that area, but I think having a very honest conversation with God in prayer about like how those things still really hurt me, and I wish those family members were a part of really new experiences, are something that God can handle. So that's been me, like strict boundaries until expectations are set, and we can be respectful, very similar to friends. And the thing about that is that generational curses are really real, and there are behaviors and patterns that kind of follow bloodlines. And in order for me to make sure that my kids don't experience what I did, I had to kind of reset the course.
The awesomeness of your podcast, like the awesome sauce of your podcast, is the fact that you're so transparent and so honest about what you've gone through and how you've recovered. And I think that the strategies you've provided today display that. But for those that are listening and want to connect further with your content, let them know how they can do so.
Yes, so you can listen to The Voice of Tamar on all podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anything else. I also have a website, Vanessa-Santiago.com, and you can find everything that I've done, including a documentary that'll give you a good breakdown of my experiences from the beginning to the end. And I also have a YouTube page that is called The Voice of Tamar, but the center page is Vanessa-Santiago.com, and you'll be able to find everything off of there.
Now, Vanessa-Santiago.com is where you can find awesome resources, but you're actually dropping some awesome news here today, which is that The Voice of Tamar is coming back.
Yes.
So new season, let the listeners know when the new season starts.
You know, that is a really good question. And one of the things that I established in my relationships, platonic and working ones, is that I have strengths and I have weaknesses. And one of those weaknesses are dates. So Miguel, when are we starting again?
For those who don't know, I'm actually the producer of Vanessa's podcast, and it will be launching October 3rd.
Yes, October 3rd. And I really have this passion to see women healed, women and men healed from sexual assault. And so I just had to figure out a way to kind of maneuver and make time to be able to still do that while juggling everything else that I have going on. So I'm super excited about that.
I want to take this moment to thank everyone who has been connected here today. Thank you. If you found value and insight with the strategies discussed today, Check out the show notes for further highlights and helpful links, and consider subscribing to be notified when a new weekly episode is available. Also, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as that helps us know that you like this podcast and want more of it. A special thanks to today's guest, and please be sure to follow them for more helpful information. Well, I'll connect with you on the next episode of Strategy Rewind, but in between time and in the meantime, check out MiguelLebron.com, where you'll find free resources. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you shortly.